Okay, so what we have going on today is the parable of the landowner and the workers. And this is taken from Matthew 20, verses 1 to 16. So, um, and this is we're getting into sort of interesting parables now because it's the other ones we're talking about sort of quite concrete ideas and things that you could see nearly in the kingdom, like the growth of the kingdom with the parable of the mustard seed and the leaven, the value that was in the kingdom with the hidden treasure and the merchant seeking fine pearls. And judgment in the kingdom with the dragnet, and so these were, and the fact that there was um, the tares in the kingdom too. This was in terms of the enemy sort of being present in this kingdom. So these are all things that we could see and sort of get our hands on, as it were. They were quite tangible. But last week we were talking then about things that were more in the hearts of the people in the kingdom. So we talked much about forgiveness last week, and that was a very governing uh, sort of necessity within the kingdom was forgiveness. And so today is going to be kind of a mixture of things that are seen and unseen in terms of concrete sort of hands-on stuff. But really, what the parable is about today is more about the graciousness of the landowner and how the workers need to demonstrate that one to another. So we got just a little picture here of uh, the king, as it were, or the landowner, and him and handing out the wages at the end of the day. Now, I know the parable was actually states that the steward was the one that handed out the money, but the landowner was certainly there, and there was a conversation then between some of the workers and the landowner about various issues. So let's look at this parable here, and we'll get this up on the screen. Now we'll put sort of bits and pieces of it because it's quite lengthy. That's what's happening with some of these parables. They're not just a verse or two long like the ones in Matthew 13. These are a bit more extended and bigger story. It says, for the kingdom of heaven is like a landowner who went out early in the morning to hire laborers for his vineyard. Now, when he had agreed with the laborers for a denarius a day, he sent them into his vineyard. And he went out about the third hour and saw others standing idle in the marketplace and said to them, you also go into the vineyard, and whatever is right, I will give you. So they went. And again, he went out about the sixth and the ninth hour and did likewise. And about the 11th hour, he went out and found others standing idle and said to them, why have you been standing here idle all day? And they said to him, because no one hired us. And he said to them, you also go into the vineyard, and whatever is right, you will receive. Verse 8, so when evening had come, the owner of the vineyard said to his steward, call the laborers and give them their wages, beginning with the last to the first. And when those came who were hired about the 11th hour, they each received a denarius. But when the first came, they supposed that they would receive more, and they likewise received each a denarius. And when they received it, they complained against the landowner, saying, these last men have worked only 1 hour, and you made them equal to us who have borne the burden and the heat of the day. But he answered one of them and said, friend, I am doing you no wrong. Did you not agree with me for a denarius? Take what is yours and go your way. I wish to give to the last men the same as you. Is it not lawful for me to do what I wish with my own things? Or is your eye evil because I am good? So the last will be first, and the first last. For many are called, but few chosen. So just to highlight a few things here in the beginning part, just as we did with the last parable there. So in purple we have the kingdom of heaven is like, and so this is our stock phrase here. These are these parables that we're concentrating on that uses this phraseology of the kingdom of heaven being like, and so it's like a landowner, and so that is then the divine driver of this particular parable. And what he then does is he goes out early in the morning to hire laborers for his vineyard. Um, so um, that's the main sort of scene that is set that Jesus has with this particular story. So the thing that I want to bring out initially here is what I call the point. Okay, so it's basically, well, what does all this sort of boil down to? And then we're going to look at uh, the the characters in terms of how they react to things, and specifically we're going to be spending time looking at the laborers who were hired first, and then we'll look at the landowner. So so just to get a few points here, the landowner is equivalent to God. And as we've seen with really most of these parables, there is this divine driver, as I would call it, this person that is where the kingdom of heaven is like, this divine person that goes out and does something. So and in this case, the landowner is God. So the vineyard then is his kingdom. And then there are the workers, are those that are in the kingdom. So they're the ones that the landowner has gone out and hired and brought into the kingdom. So they are people of his employ. Now, I think when we're talking about this, since the landowner here has these people in his hire, then these are people then that are bona fide kingdom citizens. They're not the enemy. They're not those who are on some sort of a fringe that are wannabes or something like this. But God as the landowner has gone out and he has brought in to his kingdom, into this vineyard, those that would do work. And so then there is a discussion then about attitudes of those that are kingdom citizens. And there's some attitudes that are good, and then there are those that are not so good. But the kingdom in this particular case is defined by two things. It is defined by work. Okay, so because these laborers are brought into this vineyard to do work, and so within the kingdom there is work that goes on. It is not just sort of sitting around and lounging about, as it were. But the work that is going on is tending the vines that produce fruit, and vineyards back in the Bible times was an extremely important agricultural enterprise. Everybody knew about it. Probably, somebody, if you were living back then, you always knew somebody that was involved in it. And some of these vineyards were ancient, absolutely old things handed down from one family to another. And when Jesus was talking about him being the true vine in John 15, and we being the branches, and the Father was the vine dresser, the farmer, he was using a picture that everybody really got and really understood. And when Jesus was talking about himself as the vine, he was talking about this very, very well established uh, plant that was in the ground and could have been there for, not just generations, but maybe centuries. This one plant, now it would have had new branches coming off of it, and obviously new fruit from season to season. But in terms of that one plant that was there, Jesus was likening himself as to, this thing that was well rooted into the ground for the purpose of producing fruit. And so when we talk about fruit in the Bible, much of the time it's talking about the fruit of the Spirit. So within this vineyard, God is landowner is bringing people into the kingdom, into the vineyard for the purpose of producing fruit, which is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. So now the other thing that the kingdom is defined by is by grace, and so the landowner demonstrates this at the end when he is handing out uh, the same money to each worker, regardless of and who the who the worker is. So now, so let's look here at the characters and how they're defined. So we got this basically chopped up into two different sets of people. Now we'll just look the first ones here. So let me talk about the workers generally first. So now when the Bible says that the landowner went out early in the morning to hire these men, this was again a well understood practice, which was men made themselves available in the marketplace for hire each day uh, for whatever needed to be done. So then landowners then went out and picked men to work in either the field or the house or the garden or whatever the situation was for that particular day, and would uh, give them a wage for doing this. So now, what's interesting is that the landowner goes out into the marketplace a number of times during the day in order to hire people. So he doesn't just get one batch of people and then that's it. He goes throughout the day and gets various sorts of people, but at the end of the day, he gives everybody the same money. So the workers that are hired first, they're hired, as it says in the Bible, early in the morning. And this would have been, well, as it says, early in the morning. The work day back then would have run from about 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. So these guys were hired at 6 a.m. So and then there was workers that were brought in at the third hour, which was 9 a.m. And then there was workers that were brought in at the sixth hour, which was 12 p.m., so high noon. And then there was workers that were brought in on the ninth hour, which was 3 p.m. in the afternoon. And then the last batch of workers were brought in at 5 p.m., which was the 11th hour. And and those particular guys only worked for 1 hour because the end of the day, the end of the workday was 6 p.m. So but we'll look at these workers that were hired first, because they're sort of a main character here. These are the guys that end up gurning. But they were given a negotiated wage, and they're the only workers where it says that this happened, because it says in verse 2, it says, now when they had agreed with the laborers for a denarius a day. That was standard payment. That was as we learned last week about a denarius, that was a standard day's wage. That was enough money to put bread on the table and put clothes on your back and put a roof over your head. So that was fine. So whatever you would understand a day's wage, that's what these guys got. So if you were bringing in a skilled workman to do work in your house or something like that, generally that's around 100 pounds. So, and if you have two of them, it's 200 pounds. So that would be a day's wage for a skilled worker. So now other people make less, other people make more. So but it's only with the first workers that they have an agreed wage, whereas with the other workers, the landowner says, well, whatever is right, you'll receive. So I think, really reading between the lines, they were happy to get work, whatever that meant, they were happy to work because it was better than just standing around idle at the marketplace. So, but by the end of the day, they had developed wrong attitudes, and so the notes that I have following here are taken from John Maxwell's notes on this particular passage out of his the Maxwell Leadership Bible. So, but I find the notes in that particular study Bible quite interesting, and you probably have noticed that some of these pop up every so often. But I find them good. I find them helpful in terms of understanding where these guys are going wrong. So the first thing the first problem that they have is what John Maxwell would refer to as self-absorption. And what he means by that is this, that these men, they were grumbling, they were complaining about the inequities and focusing more on their work than God's. So so they were caught up with themselves, and and because of this sort of self-centered attitude and being self-absorbed with their own self-importance, notice it's all about self, they grumble, they complain, and they think that there's an inequity there because, oh, well, we agreed, to get a denarius a day, but look at them boys over there. They, they only did an hour's worth of work, and we're getting the same money. That's not right. That's not fair. And so what they're doing is they're looking at what they're doing, not about what the grander sort of kingdom thing, which is what God's doing. And then they do comparisons, and and probably somewhere along the line, if we're honest with ourselves, we have been caught up in this kind of thing. I remember when I used to teach in the school, there was a situation which sort of led to the story that I was talking about last week. But basically, there was somebody had gotten their pay. And then it was going to be reviewed and be cut because of a certain criteria that was changed within the school remuneration system. So so certain people were paid based on certain education that they had. If you had a bachelor's degree, you got certain remuneration for work, and if you got a master's degree, then you got paid more and all this kind of stuff. But there was one particular teacher whose pay was cut because of a different understanding of the teacher's education, and so this caused then a lot of people then to go and compare their pay slips to each other. That's a very bad thing to do, because when you get hired, you are hired because of your negotiation with your employer, not with everybody else. But when you start comparing notes and comparing your pay packet, then you're like, why do they get more? Or why do I get less? He gets more, but he's been here less time. You know, I was actually one of the highest paid teachers there, even though I was part time and hadn't been there very long. Teachers that had been there for over a decade were getting paid less than me, and so this caused a lot of consternation. This caused a lot of problems. So what this ends up doing is, for these particular men, is it caused an ignoring of God's grace, and they remained preoccupied with the status of others. And so we have to realize that um, the people that are complaining here are not they're not the enemy. They're not non-Christians. Okay, so they're not bad people, but they're getting caught up in a thing there where they're starting to look at themselves, compare notes. He got more money than I did, or they're getting the same, and that's not right. That's unjust, and so you can see that these particular individuals, as they say, as it says, they complained against the landowner. Verse 12 saying, these last men have worked only 1 hour, and you made them equal to us and who have borne the burden and the heat of the day. It was like, look at us, we've done all kinds of work here, um, but it's not about that. It's not about their work and what they did or didn't do. The story is about God's grace, and but they were preoccupied with what was going on with other people. And then there was a presumption, and and this is assuming too much when it comes to rewards and forgetting that every blessing is a gift. The landowner didn't have to come to the marketplace and hire those particular men. He could have gone somewhere else and hired somebody else. And but these guys felt that they were more important because they did get hired. And but God has come to the marketplace, as it were, and called us out of a lifestyle of sin and of being slothful, basically, and just being unoccupied with anything meaningful. And He's given us meaning, and has given us work, and has given us purpose, and come into this great kingdom, come into this great vineyard, and do work. Because I'm a good landowner, and I reward my people. And but we have to realize that every blessing is a gift. So and that's what these guys forgot, and then they were making presumptions about rewards and that kind of thing. So, and then the fourth thing here is distortion. So basically, they were then judging others as unworthy. They had a misunderstanding that the entire kingdom is built on grace. So it was turning into what was just, what was not just, putting themselves in the position that they know better than the landowner. So it paints a fairly grim picture, as it were, about these workers. Now, it doesn't say at the end of the story that these particular workers then got it and they said they were sorry, but we have to realize that it's not about these men. The outcome of the story is about the landowner's grace. So there's work to be done in the kingdom, but really at the end of the day, this is about grace and having grace toward each other. So let's go and look at the the landowner, because he shows a much different side to things. We'll just read that bit again there. It says, but he answered one of them, which I find interesting that he doesn't go and try to tackle everybody all at once. He gets alongside of one of them and says, friend, I am doing you no wrong. Did you not agree with me for a denarius? Take what is yours and go your way. I wish to give to this last man the same as I to you. Is it not lawful for me to do what I wish to do with my own things? Or is your eye evil because I am good? So the last will be first and the first last. Many are called, but few are chosen. Now, incidentally, just if you're using a modern Bible, modern English Bible, that is not a King James or a New King James. That last line there, where it says "many are called, but few are chosen," is not in certain Greek manuscripts. So that those particular words are missing. And now you do find that phraseology later on in the gospel, so it does exist. But there's a bit of a toss-up in terms of, what was that in the original text, or was it kind of plucked and borrowed and then inserted somewhere at a later time? But anyway, so the landowner here. So the focus of the parable is what God does, not us. So again, the kingdom of heaven is like a landowner or a householder, as some of the versions of the Bible would say. So it's about him. It's about what he does, and it's about the attitudes that he has. So, and what Jesus is highlighting here is, look, it's not about you. It's about me. I'm the landowner. I'm the king. So the Lord then exhibits in the passage that we just read there a variety of different attitudes and different things here. So the Lord is courteous, and in reference to friend here, because he says here, friend, I am doing you no wrong. So he actually is the landowner could be quite curt. He could be quite crass and sort of in your face and going, well, look, what's your problem here? But he refers to him as friend, and that is something that is really, I think, essential in dealing with people, is that you're courteous to them, because being courteous disarms an awful lot of silly nonsense that people try to use as for intimidation or threatening purposes. So because the landowner here is not threatened, nor is he doing anything threatening. He is right. He is the landowner. He's the one that can do what he wants. So, but he doesn't push that in their face. So he is courteous in that sense. And the Lord is incapable of doing wrong, hence always does what is right. So because he says, friend, I am doing you no wrong. So and if the landowner is about God, which it is, then we know in regard to the attributes of God, that God is not capable of doing anything wrong. Just he can't do it. It's not within the nature of God to do wrong. He always does what is right, because if there was an imbalance within God where he was capable and did do something that was wrong, the universe as we would understand it would completely fall apart. And God would really be a nonsense. So God isn't a nonsense. Jesus describing really himself as the landowner, he is showing very, very definitively that he is not doing anything wrong, nor is he capable of doing anything that's wrong. Um, and he also brings perspective. I think sometimes we as people get very, very caught up in the here and now. We get caught up in circumstances, and then we base our kind of our emotional well-being on what's going on or how people react around us or something like this. And this goes on all the time within work circles or education or at home or whatever. We try to second guess people, and but as I say to folks sometimes, you don't know other people's backstories. They may be getting frustrated with you, but it's not you. It's they're kicking the cat, and it's not the cat's problem. It's just that you're frustrated with something else that has nothing to do with you. So, but then we take it personally and get thick about it. So, but what the landowner is doing here is he's saying, did you not agree with me for denarius? So, he's bringing the worker back to what the primary story is. Okay, well, instead of looking at the perceived injustice that's going on here, let's go back to the beginning. And when you were hired, did you not agree with me for denarius? So when people are brought back to how things are, again, it disarms an awful lot of stupidity, because you're like, okay, you're right. Yes, that is what I agreed to. So, and so in that, he then goes back to the facts of the agreement, saying, did you not agree with me for denarius? This is the facts of the matter, and this is this is the perspective. We're talking about payment here. But then what the landowner does is he doesn't just sit in the space of the facts. He then goes into the place of grace and talks that through. So Jesus is very, very clever, when he's dealing with these kinds of stories, because he's able to pack so much stuff into just a little handful of verses. Because I mean, it took us what 45 seconds or something really to read this particular passage. But we've been talking about this passage, and it's like 1 o'clock in the afternoon now, and we've been talking about this for the last half hour. So and we're not quite done. So there's a lot that Jesus is packing into this particular thing. And the Lord is fair and he is just, because he says then in verse 14, take what is yours and go your way. That's what we agreed on. This is the perspective that we have. Let's get back to it. And is it not fair and is it not just? I mean, because, if these guys were then, able to make the landowner agree from their perspective and say, oh, well, I guess you're right. You feel a bit hard done by because you're a man that only worked for an hour. He's getting a hold of an hour. So, yeah, I guess you're right. We should give you more money, and so that's shifting the goalposts. That's changing things. That's changing the status quo. And that is not right. That is unfair and that is unjust. So the landowner is, very clearly taking these guys and, helping them to see, exactly what's going on. And the Lord has the prerogative to do as he pleases, because he goes on to say, he says that, take what is yours and go your way. I wish to give to this last man the same as to you. So the landowner is saying, this is what I wish to do. It's not about you. It's about what I choose to do. And so the landowner is God. God can do whatever he wants. And But um, but what God pleases to do is always, always, always in the best interest of his people. So, God is not vindictive. God is not crass. God is not uh, uh, capricious. God is not, somebody who's an ogre or something, just wants to be nasty for the sake of being nasty. But at the same time, he says, look, I can do what I want to do because I'm God. I can do this. I own the land. I own this vineyard. So don't start to push into my space and try to be me. So but God always does not only what he pleases, but what is right. As you look through this list here, there's a lot of great things about God. That he's courteous, he does what's right, he sticks to the facts, he's fair, he's just. So uh, I think about that verse in Philippians 2:13 that says, "For it is God who works in you." A Here, sorry, hang on, let me get it right before I get it wrong. Uh, Philippians, for it is God who works in you both to will and to do for his good pleasure. So, so it pleases God to exercise his will and his doing in your life. So and it's for your good. It'll never ever be for your bad. Now sometimes there are hard things that happen in life. We experience sickness, we experience maybe loss of employment or loss of money or something like this. But we have to realize that God is always in control, and he will not allow his people to be so much in despair that God's going, oh well, I guess we all got this wrong, so you go down the pan, But that's not what it's about. What he pleases to do is always for our benefit, um, and he gives understanding in a non-patronizing way regarding sovereignty. So if we again look at this verse. Uh, he says, take what is yours, go your way. I wish to give to this last man the same as I to you. Is it not lawful for me to do what I wish with my own things? Now, I think the attitude of the landowner here, he could be rather twisted up about it and say, as they say in Northern Ireland, look see, but but I think how his attitude is here is he's being very non-patronizing, and but he's talking about his sovereignty because he says, is it not lawful for me to do what I wish with my own things? Again, the landowner is bringing the focus, away from the the men and their unjust and distorted preoccupied, selfish attitudes, and bring them around to the focus of grace and the focus of the landowner. So he gives this understanding, and thank God that God gives us understanding. If you remember in some of our studies when we were talking about Psalm 119 with that word or that phrase that's translated give me understanding or make me understand or instruct me. It's that Hebrew word that has to do with, Lord, get me out of the fog here, get me out of this mist that I'm in where I can't see the forest for the trees because I want to see things clearly. And that's what the landowner is doing with this man, is he's giving understanding, he's giving clarity in regard to who he is. And he gives understanding as to the real motives. Now, I find this interesting here because he says, or is your eye evil because I am good? Now, what the landowner is doing is he's getting really right down to the brass tacks here and saying this. is your eye evil because I am good? Now, um, the word evil in this particular context. Um, okay. But the word for evil there really means to be stingy. To be real, tight with your attitudes and tight with your money and all that kind of thing. Whereas the word good is talking about being generous. Now, if you look at some of the more modern translations of the Bible, um, it would replace the word good there with generous. Uh, so uh, and that's what this boils down to is these men really are envious, because the landowner is being good to everybody, and being generous to everybody, and taking the focus off them and putting it on the landowner and so on, and and if you think about the verse there in uh, and back in the Sermon on the Mount, where it um, says this. Uh, the lamp of the body, chapter 6 and verse 22, it says, the lamp of the body is the eye. If therefore your eye is good, your whole body will be full of light. That's actually the same word there that's used for good here. And so Jesus is talking about a generous spirit. Whereas if your eye is bad or evil, you're being stingy, you're being tight, you're being, it's not about grace, it's about legalism now. It's like, no, that's wrong, that's unjust. What you're doing there, landowner, that's bad. I know better. I know employment law, daggone it. And but when we are in God's employ, we have to realize that God is the one that is generous, God is the one that is gracious, and we need to then be the same with others. So, um, so it brings 2 points here to finish up, and that is when we are focused on self, uh, including comparing ourselves to others and not God, life is frustrating, unfulfilling, but it could be temporarily satisfying. Now, what I mean by that is you might get an earthly reward, but the earthly rewards generally don't last very long. They're sort of pats on the back, and that's about as good as it's going to get. Whereas when it says here, when we are focused on God, His work, His grace, and not self, life is fulfilling, joyful, and eternally rewarding. So I think really, these 2 statements really do then summarize what this particular passage is all about. Because if it's focused on self, which is about what these particular guys that were hired first have, because it doesn't talk about the attitudes of the other men. I'm thinking that they were just happy to get whatever was coming, because the landowner says whatever is right you'll get. So that's his opinion, that's his take. But because these people are brought into God's employ, then this means that they are people that, in a sense, God has saved out of the marketplace. And so we're not talking about, unsaved and saved here. We're talking about people in the kingdom, people that are bona fide part of God's family, as it were, and then God Himself. But the problem is that we get caught up in these things. We're like these particular individuals who get caught up in comparing things and get caught up in self-absorption and comparison and presumption and distortion. And you end up then with these things here where life is then frustrating, it's unfulfilling, and you could have some of this temporarily satisfying things, but it's only from the world, and it's a bit like getting an ice cream on a hot day, but then when the ice cream's finished, then it's still hot, So and and you're still miserable. But when we focus on God, focus on His work, His grace, and we then translate that to how we then deal with each other, because that's how God deals with us, then life is fulfilling. Life has joy in it, and there is eternal rewards that are in it.